The button is pushed. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good, okay. My family says I'm loud, so I don't usually need a microphone. Well, welcome to my session. Welcome to New England Drupal Camp. Happy to see everyone here. This is such a great venue, huh? I think this auditorium is pretty new, maybe in the last year. And it's funny because I graduated from here in 1988, and my wife and I met on the second floor in this building. So, and still happily married. So there we go. So this is a special place for me. She reminded me of that this morning on the phone. She said, "You know, we met in that building." So I'm Stephen Cross. I'm one of the organizers for the camp. You can also find me at these various places, talkingdrupal.com. The slides for today are on my website, /resources, so you can pull them down and feel free to do with them what you like. This camp, we decided to make a focus on DevOps. I think it was a good decision. We had a lot of great sessions today. We have a great keynote speaker coming in later. And modern workflows are where we are talking about things in Drupal today. We've matured to the point that we're thinking about automation, automating the way we build code, the way we deliver code. And I'm going to talk today about the way we test code. And the interesting thing about these modern workflows and automation is that you should be automating something that you've done manually for a while. And if you're anything like me, and one of the reasons I'm giving this presentation is I've seen the light. So I'm going to try to share that light with you. Is all these things up there, eating healthy, daily journaling, going to church weekly, consistently, are things that I've always tried to do and wanted to do, but never really did all that well. You know, the New Year's resolution guy, where I would start off and come into the new year with great ambitions, and 2 or 3 months down the road, I'd be onto something else and forget about the things that I knew were important, and I just couldn't commit to doing them. And one of those things for me personally was over the past year, I've lost about 65 pounds. And I've needed to do that for 20 years, anyone who's known me. And I still probably have another 50 to go, according to my BMI. But one of the ways that I was able to finally get over this hump, the hump for me was eating better and exercising regularly. That's the secret, by the way. If anyone wants to lose weight, okay? That's the secret right there. It's something that I learned from this guy called Mike Daggett, and he's known in the Weight Watcher world as Fat Dag. And I learned a lot from him, and one of the key things I learned is to set attendance goals, not performance goals. And what that means is, if you want to start a new exercise regimen, don't decide that you're going to run 5 miles a day, or 3 miles a day, or 1 mile a day. Set an attendance goal that you're going to do something every day. So get out and walk every day. Don't worry about how far it is. Just do it every day, because you're far better off to actually go to the gym 5 days in a row and just at least do something, instead of going one day and working out so hard that you can't move for the rest of the week. So this is the same approach that I think applies to testing. It's one of those things that I always knew I needed to do better, automated testing, but it always was at the end of the life cycle, something that I didn't do very well. So one of the lessons for today is, when it comes to doing automated testing or manual testing, is to set attendance goals, to do something in every project, on every pull request, until it becomes part of who you are and what you do, and then you can excel, and then you can meet those performance goals later. So the point of this whole presentation is probably summarized right here in this sentence, which is, effective automated testing begins with effective user acceptance testing. So in order to automate something, you need to probably do it really well first in a manual way. And I'm going to show you a way that I was able to move myself from someone who wasn't doing testing, and user testing specifically, regularly on a project, to someone who now is a firm believer that it's a really important process in the development cycle. And I did this kicking and screaming, by the way, and I didn't invent any of this. I'm a contractor, and I've been working for the Department of Justice for the last 2 years. And it's the team there that I work with that implemented some of these guidelines that I wasn't happy with at first, and then slowly learned that the value of user acceptance testing is very high, and now I'm about to preach it. So what is user acceptance testing? Well, in the world that we're all in, it's the last part, usually the last part of a development process when you've finished your coding, you've got a build ready, and then you've got the real users using the real software to validate that it's going to work in the real world. The things that they wanted and you thought you built, is it really working? How many people today have user acceptance testing implemented into their development cycles? So probably maybe half the room, maybe a little less. When you implement user acceptance testing, you usually go through this process of first documenting. You're going to document all the things you're going to do. You're going to pick who the user testers are that you're going to test. You're going to give them some scripts to do this testing on, and then they're going to perform the testing, and then you're going to get the results and do something with it. Back to my initial points here is focusing on attendance to get that done if you're not doing it today, and keep the process simple. So I'm going to show you what I'm doing to keep this process simple and have it very effective. And I'll use it by an example. So I'm currently working on a team that works on the ATF's website, atf.gov. And one of the pieces of functionality that was requested a year ago or so was the ATF has agents, ATF agents, that they retire, leave the agency. When they leave the agency, they no longer have access to the internal networks. They lose their security clearance. They can't get to some documents and stuff that they would typically have access to as agents. One of those pieces of one of those documents is not top secret, but it's the monthly newsletter. So it's what's going on in the agency, and they want to give the agents access to still get these documents. So what they decided to do was come to the IT group and say, hey, can you put a section on the website that we can secure, and I say that with these rabbit fingers here, secure, that an agent needs to put in a username and password to get access to these documents. But by the way, we can't actually create user accounts in Drupal for security reasons. We just need like a speed bump here. So we took the approach of, we used the media module. We put some PDF files out on the file system. We categorized them as inside ATF documents. And we used the protected modules, the protected pages module. And what that module does is it allows you to, on a particular page in Drupal, put a username and password. So everyone gets the same username and password. You just need it to see that page. And then what we did is we just put some simple hook code in there to validate that anyone going to this page has already passed that sort of bump of security, and we can let them see the documents. Pretty straightforward implementation of something. So let's move along. If I was to create some user acceptance testing for that kind of very simple functionality, I have three groups of people I'm dealing with. I have user acceptance testing that I want to give the content administrator. This is the person who's going to enter this content in, so I've added new functionality to the website. They need to test that works. Then I have a different user, which is the anonymous public user who shouldn't have access to these documents, so they shouldn't be able to find them, they shouldn't be able to see them. If they have a URL that someone emailed them, they shouldn't be able to get to them. And then I have the person this functionality is actually for, which is the retired agent, who is going to go to his computer once a month to see who has died in the agency and who had babies and what is the latest scuttlebutt going on. So the UAT, the basic steps for this, for a content administrator would be they need to test uploading a PDF file, marking it as private, set a category on it to inside ATF, and publish. Pretty straightforward. A script for this would look something like this. And when I say a script, I mean something written out that I hand to someone and say, hey, do this. So log in as a content administrator, go to this URL, upload the PDF file, select a private, enter Apple for the title of the document, choose the organization, enter this Apple for the description, and choose save. These are actual scripts that I took out of our ticketing system, and I think I've changed a few things to protect some security here. And then we have the UAT for the general public. And it's basically, can they get to a page they're not supposed to get to? So this script would look something like this. Open an incognito window, go to this URL page, verify that it's asking you for a password. Then try to go to this specific document, verify this page is not visible. I'm just curious, how many people are actually trying this right now? That's what happened the last time I gave this presentation. I could see people quickly going to their keyboard and typing in that URL. And hopefully, if you go to it, it's not accessible. So this is a script that we would follow. This is kind of very basic stuff. The last one is for the agent. The agent has a script where he really needs to open an incognito window again, go to this particular place, type in the username and password that we've given him, verify they can see the documents. So, in our development cycle, this is a very familiar process that we all use today, which is you go through this develop, you get a request in, so new functionality or bug in the system, you do some coding, 12 o'clock, we're going to do some coding on it. When the developer's done, does a pull request. Hopefully it goes to a different set of developers that are going to do a code review for you. That passes code review, you're going to do a merge and deploy to a stage environment, and then we see the UAT over there. That's when our users actually have the job of testing that functionality. They like it, it passes the green light, then we merge to production. Familiar process, right? Anytime during the circle something goes wrong, you send it right back up to the top and it goes through again. Well, when you implement UAT properly, UAT isn't really for the users in my mind. The users is the last person that deals with UAT. The UAT is also for the team that's doing the development. This is an important point and something that I learned the value of, is that in our development process, you get the requirements in, you usually write the business requirements out, the technical approach, this is all part of our ticket that we put in, then we summarize how we're going to do it, and then we write the code, and the last thing we do is the developer who wrote the code and gathered the requirements writes the UAT. Those scripts that we saw a few minutes ago are written by that person. The pull request is created. It goes to another developer to do a code review. Our code reviews aren't just going into Git and looking at the pull request and checking out the code. Our code reviews are also build that branch on your local machine and do the UAT steps as written. So our code review is code review / UAT review. So developer 1 wrote the UAT steps. Hopefully he got them mostly right. Developer 2 goes in to do code review. They're actually doing UAT review as well. So if there's any problem in our system with the UAT, let's say the steps aren't right, or there's a step missing, or the developer doesn't think the UAT is strong enough to test all the scenarios, that ticket gets rejected and goes back up to 12 o'clock. Not for any code problems, but for UAT problems. So it becomes a really important part of our development cycle. So once that UAT passes, along with the code check, gets deployed to stage, now the real tester, and we'll talk about who those are in a moment, the real tester is actually going to do the testing. So the UAT has actually already been done 3 times by the time it gets over to the user. So there's a much higher chance of that functionality actually being correct and working the way it's supposed to, because it was tested thoroughly all along from the development team. So who does the testing? Well, everyone. In my scenario, right? In my scenario, everyone is doing user testing. The developer 1 does it, developer 2 does it, and based on the current projects that I'm working on, most of the user acceptance testing is done by the content administrators, because they're the ones who make most of the requests to us. And every once in a while, we'll have an end user, someone else in the Department of Justice, go in and do some testing based on functionality. But so by the time we come completely around to 12 o'clock again, we get a really high level of confidence that what we've written is actually going to work the way it's supposed to work. So the benefits of this process that of having UAT everywhere is the focus on the end product. Although we always like to say that it's part of what the developer's doing at the beginning is focus on the end result, it actually is, because the initial developer is writing the testing for the end result. So the focus on the product is clearly right from the start. The second benefit here, I think, is the ownership of the problems becomes broader to the group. When you have a team of developers, when they're doing code reviews and they have to test the UAT, they're also now kind of taking ownership of the functionality a bit. And there's it's almost like cross-training a bit, in that the developers know what each other's doing and how it's affecting the system, because they're actually testing the code as it's going through. One of the most important things in this list is that 4th bullet, which is documentation. You saw how, and that was a very basic script, by the way, that I showed you, just for examples today. But we could typically have scripts that are like this long in a ticket to get through some intensive functionality. But you now have documentation on how to use your website if you do this long enough. So in the 2 years that I've been working on this project, we have UAT for every single ticket. I mean, there's probably been 2 tickets out of 2,000 that there wasn't UAT on for some strange reason, but every single Drupal security patch that comes out, there's UAT steps to verify, we've touched these 5 modules in this update. Well, we have scripts, we have test scripts that go through and verify all the areas of that system are still working. So we have documentation on how to use the website by those UAT scripts. Someone else new comes on the team, and one of the first things, we had a new developer come on about 3 months ago. They want to understand the system. Well, I can give them 15 tickets from user acceptance testing, and they can see certain areas of the system, how they work. It's self-documenting, hugely important. And the last thing is sort of the end result is I think you get a really strong team of people when you've got a development team that's focusing on the end result of the user acceptance testing, and they're seeing each other's work. So what ends up happening is the content administrators are also taking some ownership, because they're making a request to a feature getting made, and then they're forced to test it through these things at the end of the process. You end up having a nice strong team. And what you end up with is what I would call a testing culture, is that it's understood in our organization that any change, any ticket that goes through the system will be tested. One other point I wanted to make. After about a year of doing this kind of process, this is back to documentation, you've built up a library of tests. So if you know you're implementing a feature that was touched 6 months ago, you just go back to that initial ticket and grab the user acceptance testing from there. You've now got a library of tests. So it doesn't take you, if you have a test that's 100 steps long, chances are you're only writing 4 or 5 new steps in it, because you're just grabbing something that you've had from the past. Forgot to mention that. So you've got a great library. Oh, this was my next slide. The way we handle this, and I've done a little research to figure out how people manage the UAT and how to document it properly. And I think what we're doing works the best, is we keep it simple, in that we just use Jira for our system, which a lot of people are using, but our ticketing system, we just include the steps right in the ticket. So any ticket basically has got sections, business requirements, technical implementation, deployment steps, and UAT, and who the UAT is for, what server they do it on, and it actually looks like that. That's a screenshot from the ticket that I talked about. And there is a little interesting thing in Jira. I don't know if you can do, you see these little check marks, the green check marks? When you go into a Jira ticket and use their markdown kind of environment, if you put those 2 brackets, it's an open checkbox that hasn't been checked. And then if you go and put a slash, I don't have the slash here, I thought I did.
I think you showed it on
Did
your
I?
previous slide. Yeah.
Oh, right there.
In
Oh, yeah,
previous
okay,
slide.
on the bottom. If you put the slash inside the brackets, it checks it off. So part of our process is, hey, the person who's going to now take this ticket when it's going all the way around and deploy this on the site, you look down that ticket, there better be all green checkboxes there. Because if there aren't, that ticket is not going to production. So the person who did the user acceptance testing, their last step is to say that they've completed it. So green tickets, everything's green, we go live. So how does this relate to automated testing? Well, Behat is a testing framework. I would imagine most people here are familiar with it. And the idea of Behat is to test your business requirements. So it's the automated side of the user acceptance testing. It's doing the same kind of thing. It's testing from the user's perspective from a browser. And I call it, I say kinda here, it's a framework for user acceptance testing, kind of. Behat is, how many people have used Behat, by the way? Curious. Okay. How many people would like to use Behat and just haven't gotten to it yet? Okay. That was me about 1.5 years ago. So Behat is great in that it has a language in the, anyone remember the name of the language it uses to?
Cucumber. Gherkin.
Gherkin, yes. Someone said cucumber, I think.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
Gherkin is a derivative of cucumber.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So Gherkin is this language that you can use that's very English-like. So this is like a test script. If you kind of look through that text there, you create a scenario that you're going to test, and then you say things like, given this situation, I expect this to happen, verify this is happening. And what this framework does is, this PHP framework basically takes that kind of language and puts it into code. And they give you a framework to make that happen. So the user acceptance testing that I was talking about before, we've got a person, that's the big happy smiley face guy on the left. He's using his browser to interface with the Drupal application. Behat is replacing that smiley face. That's the idea here. So
More ways than one.
yes. So that's where Behat sits. And I struggled learning Behat. I was having trouble conceptually understanding what was happening, what was going on. So I take the next few slides and maybe just explain it at a high level for you. So if you're about to jump into it, you might have a head start of the things I had to figure out. So Behat kind of works in 2 different ways. It's talking to your application at the end, and it can do it in 2 ways. It can do it by using a headless browser emulator to talk to your app, or it can actually use a browser itself, a web browser itself. Okay, 2 different approaches. The first one, the headless emulator, means Behat is talking to an headless API for the browser. The benefit of that is it's really fast. Super, super fast. The problem with it is you can't test JavaScript and Ajax with it because it's doing a headless interface. So if you want to test Java and JavaScript and Ajax stuff, you need to use the second approach, which is you're going to use Behat to interface with a browser controller, which is actually interfacing with the browser. You can see a browser pop up on the screen and do the things you want it to do. That is just slower, but it provides you much more capability. So depending on what you're trying to test, you're going to take two different approaches. The next thing to mention here is when you see Behat, you'll always see mink. You'll see people mention mink. What is mink? Mink is the software API, the level that interfaces between Behat and those two different approaches. So you can write the same Behat commands, and depending on which approach you take, mink is the layer in between that translates to those two different approaches. So you will need mink. The last thing I want to mention here is from the Drupal side of this thing. So you can use Behat and not use Drupal drivers at all. You can install Behat and test your Drupal application because you're just testing through the browser. So there's nothing special about interfacing with Drupal until you try to do Drupal-y things. So what are our Drupal-y things? Well, when you install the module Drupal extension, which is the Behat stuff, strange name, you basically get 3 drivers. So 3 ways to interface with Drupal. You have Blackbox, Drush, and the Drupal API. So what are those 3 things? They're pretty straightforward. Blackbox basically gives you one thing you can do. Is it allows you to take your HTML and translate it to a region to make your syntax easier to write. So for example, if you have either by classes or IDs in your HTML, you can say that, hey, this thing called dot footer, whatever, actually is my footer. So when you write in your Gherkin syntax, you can say, look in the footer for this text, and Blackbox allows you to translate what footer really means based on your website. That's what Blackbox does. The other 2 tools, the first one, drivers, the first one is the Drush driver. And you can see that Drush gives you the ability to interface with Drupal for doing things like creating users and doing Drush-like commands. The benefit of using the Drush driver is that you can run a Behat script on a server that is not on your local machine or on your local server. So it's on a machine that's disconnected to you, like you can with Drush, a Drush alias. If you want to use the Drupal API, which is the most powerful of these drivers here, you can see the capability you get there. You basically can do anything you can do with the Drupal API. The drawback of it is that you're doing it on the machine that you're running on. Not that that's necessarily a drawback. Because of these wonderful workflows that we have today, you can kick off a Behat script running in your Circle CI, and it will be running on the machine that all your stuff is sitting in. So the Drupal API is the way to go to get most of your Drupal-y things done. So like go and create a node, add a user, do all this kind of stuff, you can do in a scripting language. And that scripting language, once you install the Drupal extension, you can use a Behat command to see all of the types of things you can do. And this is an example here of like the first 20 or 30 commands that you get by installing the Drupal extension. You can say, given I'm an anonymous user, that's all you have to say. And now it knows, okay, I'm going to go to the website, I'm not going to log in, and what do you want me to do? So the Behat in the Gherkin language really makes it easy for you to write scripts once you have it set up. So the beauty of all these approaches I just mentioned, the headless, the browser controller, and the 3 drivers, is you don't have to choose one, you can use all 3. Depending on what your scenario is, you can set up Behat to configure these to use whichever pieces you need to use for the testing that you need to get done. So if I was to jump back to my inside ATF Behat, this is what the script, the actual Behat script looks like. The feature that I'm testing is inside ATF. The description is it says at the top, verify anonymous users. And I've got the 3 scenarios here, just like I described earlier, and that is the actual syntax that I use to make this script happen. Okay, so we talk about the manual UAT process, which you can see I'm a huge fan of. I think you should start there and start slow, but do it all the time. And then we've talked about some automated stuff. So what do you actually automate? So like I said earlier, I do manual UAT for everything. Now, do I replace that with automation and not do any manual UAT? Not in my life would I ever do that. I already mentioned how critical it is to our team and to our workflow and to our documentation. All that stuff is important to us, so I'm not going to get rid of it. But what I do want to do is take the UATs that are the most critical and the things that are important for my system to be running and working properly. I'll take those and automate those. I'm not going to replace any of my manual UAT, but I'm just going to supplement what I'm doing to make sure the system's running properly. So the things that are critical and the things that are repetitive, this example that I've been using of inside ATF, I have just one of those scripts that would be running on a regular basis. It's the one to verify that the public can't see documents they're not supposed to. That's the only one I really care about all the time, because that's the critical one for me. If an agent can't log in because something broke, we'll eventually figure that out. And someone will call and say, hey, I can't log in to read my newsletter. So we'll go in and we'll fix that bug. But the one I really care about is, can the public see those documents when they're not supposed to? So that's the one I would automate. Something that I forgot to mention earlier that I want to bring up, and it's back here. It's because I don't have my presenter slide showing. So I've forgotten some points. Where is it? Here. So if you imagine just think back to what my scripts looked like earlier that we're writing in UAT, and look at this. So by doing the manual UAT steps the way we've implemented them, having a developer write this instead, or in addition to the UAT steps, is a piece of cake, because it's almost the same stuff. The other point is that we haven't gotten there yet, but eventually we could have non-technical people writing these scripts as part of our process, because it is English-like and it is English enough that our content editors who are doing the final UAT all the time, they're used to seeing the scripts. Sometimes they recommend changes to them. They could actually write some of this if they wanted to. I'm not sure they'll ever want to, but they could. And I guess my last point about what you should and shouldn't automate is you can't automate or replace the domain knowledge that the people have when they're running the UAT tests manually. So someone's insight into that doesn't look right, or I don't think this is proper, or I'm looking at this test and how is it affecting some other point of the system. All that domain knowledge that these content editors have can never be replaced by an automated test. So that's why you need to keep those. That's another reason to keep those automated tests in place, because those people have the right perspective and intuition of when something doesn't look right. And Behat doesn't have a command to figure that out yet. So how would I recommend someone getting started? So I'm just rolling back to my journey 18 months ago with this. Is I would start, if you want to learn Behat, is to get out of Drupal. Don't install it in Drupal. Just install Behat on your machine by itself and test it on sites. Doesn't need to be a Drupal thing. Learn how the technology works, get familiar with the scripts, get familiar with the language, work through that stuff. Then layer in the Drupal piece once you're past that initial learning. I like to do local builds and local testing on stuff, so I have a couple of dozen scripts that I manually run when I do code to test things. So don't be afraid to work locally. You don't have to rush into getting all these things working with your continuous integration tools. Get familiar with the technology first. And I think that's all I have. Any questions? Yes?
Do you know if there's any movement in the contrib community to add custom step definitions to contributed modules, like the paragraphs module? It's probably a pretty common thing for somebody to be able to create a node and populate a paragraph field or some such thing.
Like automatically include these testing scripts?
Yeah, the actions and conditions and things.
It's actually, if you
that's a
come
good
across
question,
it, Greggles, who's an important kind of member in the community, and Ben Melanson, both of them have kind of popped up at different times saying, hey, let's start including Behat tests in our contrib. And I've been meaning to reach out to both of them and say, hey, what did you hear back? Because the threads die in each of those cases.
Okay.
So I'm sure, hopefully somebody else here knows, oh no, it's alive and well. But it's a great idea that I specifically went and looked for because it's so logical.
Well, I can tell you this. If I take the Behat that I have running in one of the sites I'm on, and if I say go look through the entire contrib folder and run the features, run any Behat feature that's out there, there is stuff out there.
Okay.
I don't know if it all runs, but I know that I need to make sure that I say, hey, only run mine, because if I don't, the thing runs a long time, I start to see a bunch of errors.
Yeah.
So I know some contrib modules have Behat features included.
And a lot of distributions, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure that Lightning does, Panoply does, and so you can actually locate them and run those folders.
Yeah.
But as a general practice, it seems like just a dead logical thing to do. And you were showing a few of the lines that come when you install Drupal extension, the module. It actually has several test fragments
Right.
written already. So
Yeah,
you
yeah,
get
there's some
a
scripts
list
that
of
are
them.
in here that do that kind of stuff. Yeah. Anything else?
For what it's worth, just
Yep.
to again add to the encouragement
Yep.
your that's kind of underlaid all of what you said. One of the most productive things for new team members both on our client side and on our development team has been actually to go through sites and fill in or improve Behat tests. So it's got some complexity, but the starting point of it is there's really no barrier. Somebody can say, what's my persona as I look at this page. I'm an anonymous user. What am I trying to accomplish, and why am I trying to accomplish it? And those three lines add so much richness to what the developers understand about it, what your user documentation looks like at the end of it, this testing cycle that you were talking about. So I think your suggestion that it's like something you start small and you build up on, I would say it's a great onboarding task for new team members. Our clients probably write 30% of our features, the kind of top part of a Behat test, and maybe even a little bit more than 30% because they have the familiarity with the audience and at a glance can tell whether a page is broken and that type of thing. So they participate pretty actively. But I would love to see the community also kind of like throwing some of this stuff together.
Thank you, Kay. Patrick?
What kind of things are Behat not good for, or can it not do? Like, what kind of are some of the gotchas?
Yeah, so I've been writing more scripts over the past 4 or 5 months, and I'm finding that from the administrative side in dealing with JavaScript and Ajax kind of things, that you run into problems quickly and it gets complicated fast. I think I've found ways around those things, dealing with those things, but that's one area that I've had a bit of difficulty. Fortunately, it's not an area that I'm focusing my testing on primarily, so it hasn't been a huge problem for me. But I know that some people who've tried to use Behat with some complex interfaces to do data entry and stuff have had problems. And at that point, you probably need to fall back on other PHP strategies for testing. Have you found the same thing, Kay? Or?
I thought Adam, who's here, Approximate,
Oh, yeah.
also talks about this
Yeah.
a fair amount. And one of the guidelines that I heard him give just in passing was, if you find your Behat tests are getting really complex, it's probably time to switch to unit testing
Yeah.
for that particular thing. But the upside until you get to that point,
Right.
is pretty big.
And that's kind of one of the reasons that I focus this from the user acceptance testing side, because if you're trying to do software testing, unit testing is probably a more fundamental approach.
Yeah, Behat's a little bit dumb in the sense that you tell it what it should find, and it'll say, "Yep, I found it."
Right.
And so it's not going to really do.
Yeah.
Not that unit testing is that much more
Right.
complex, but ultimately you're just saying, hey, if such and such appears on a page, green light it. It's working. You want to test that you got a search box? You got a search box. You want to test that if you enter a term, you get this search result. It'll do that. It'll do a pretty good job of that kind of thing. But at a certain point, yeah, it feels a little lightweight. But it'll test a lot of things like what your user would do.
Exactly.
Instead of having users clicking through your website and saying, yep, still works, yep, still works, yep, still works. This does a really nice job of it.
Now that Nightwatch is in core, is this something you use in parallel with Nightwatch instead of, or Nightwatch instead of this?
I'm only using this right now,
Okay.
but good.
Along those lines, I mean, this definitely seems to be great for functionality. What about design testing? Anything you can do on the front end for this?
I'm not doing any design testing with this, just functionality. I don't know if anyone else has any input on design testing.
What do you mean by design
Yeah.
testing, though?
Is the color right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you check for a hash, the text number, for example. But that would be painful.
Okay.
Yeah, you could say, go look at the
That's a lot of-
HTML and do you see a FFFFF? Yeah. But I'm not sure that that's what you mean. So, I mean, this is not, we're not doing regression testing on the visual side. It's in our plans to do that soon and implement that in the same kind of way. So visual regression testing and that kind of stuff is probably something that you could implement pretty straightforwardly. I haven't done that yet, but
Look forward to your next session.
okay. Stay tuned. I wouldn't have imagined a year and a half ago or 2 years ago I would be standing up and talking about automated testing and user acceptance testing, certainly. So, you never know. Yes?
Have you found any good techniques for the semi-automated testing? For example, you brought up the browser controller, so when it spins up the browser, it goes through its commands, and say you have scenario testing, say it's e-commerce, they log in, they go to the cart, and then you want to do experimental from there, but each time you don't want to re-enter those users.
So you want to do partly automated, partly
Yeah, I
manual?
just wondered if you had
I haven't tried that.
done that, only because sometimes
Right.
jumping into the full automation
Yeah.
gets to be a lot.
So interesting point. Kick off the test and have it stop at a certain point. You take over from there.
Right.
Yeah, I haven't done that. Interesting idea. Add that to my list too. Do the first 15 repetitive steps for me, and then move on from there. Yeah.
And it even works during the development
Yep.
cycle.
I remember hearing someone speak about recently that they used Behat testing for doing migrations of content to sites because it's just an automated user that you could actually fire up a Behat script to do migrations and stuff like that. Interesting idea.
Speaking on that, actually,
Yeah.
I'm at this crossroads right now where I know I need to start using this kind of stuff. And I'm looking at tools like Selenium and Catalan Studio.
Yep.
And I'm sitting here wondering, what's the upside of using something like Behat if Catalan for free, for example, has a zillion different tools and actions and things, and it can communicate with any website. I don't have to have some underlying support. you know, I'm trying to make that decision. Do I invest my time learning Behat, or should I be like one step higher level? I don't know if
Tools
anyone
that
has-
are, no, I understand. So you're asking tools that make that automation for you easier, that the building of the test scripts and that kind of stuff easier for you.
Not just that, it's just this idea that I'm taking it out of the application itself and,
Mhm.
and sort of doing it from outside of the application, like you do with Selenium. And I wonder
Mhm.
if you or anyone else has.
Well, that's kind of really what you're doing with Behat too. It's you're outside of the application. It really has nothing to do with the app at all. You don't even have to have it installed
Mm,
and know anything about your Drupal application technically.
see, yeah.
So it's really the same.
yeah,
It's really the same thing.
so it's like a preference thing.
Yes.
You prefer Selenium over Behat?
Well, Selenium is a tool that Behat can work with. So Selenium is. Let me
You
go
talked about JavaScript testing. For
Yes, yes. So I'm going to go back to this slide here. Selenium is the tool that gives you this browser controller interface.
I see, okay.
And I think, for what it's worth,
Yeah.
what's the there's a Google Chrome headless driver that I think is largely replacing Selenium.
Mm.
And I think
Right.
the Nightwatch inclusion in core has an issue queue about that discussion part of it.
Right.
For what it's worth.
And one of the things that I struggled with early on to try to get this running is understanding of like what all these pieces are.
Mm.
When you kind of look at the Behat configuration file, if you grab one from someone, you're looking at it, and it's got all these drivers installed and all this stuff, and you're like, what the hell is going on here? And which is why I recommend start by putting it all together yourself one piece at a time, and you can get an understanding of the big picture and what's happening. Anything
And
else?
use those pre-written fragments, from when you first go through it.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the command line command is, but you can give a command line command and get all of the options that are currently in your Behat test. And, it's a good place to start. It's simple.
And for those of you who want to learn, if you go to behat.org, is it? I'm not sure whatever the behat.org, they have a really excellent tutorial in there that takes you through installing it and then actually writing the translation of the language. So you can create your own commands in the PHP side by using a few classes. And when you go through that tutorial, at least for me, that's when the light went on what was actually happening.
Well, for what it's worth, Drupal extension, the documentation I think does something similar.
Yeah,
So
it
if
does.
you're aiming at Drupal, that
Right.
might also be a place to start.
All right, excellent. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.